Hello students, in today's video we are going to discuss different types of insulin preparations, their uses, pharmacokinetic parameters and some important features of these insulin preparations. Now as we all know, insulin is a peptide hormone that is secreted by pancreas in the blood. It is produced by beta cells of pancreatic islets, also known as islets of Langerhans. Now, before discussing different types of insulin preparations, let's quickly review structure and functions of insulin. Now, look at the structure of insulin. Insulin is a polypeptide hormone. It is a protein and therefore it is made up of amino acids. It is made up of two chains, A chain and B chain. A chain has 21 amino acids while B chain has 30 amino acids. Now A and B chains are linked by two disulfide bonds. Now in addition to this, A chain consists of one intramolecular disulfide bond. Now let's quickly review main functions of insulin. Now, one of the most important functions of insulin is to lower level of glucose in the blood. Now, increased glucose in the blood for long time produce disease that is known as diabetes mellitus. Now, look at this figure. This is a cell. This is an insulin receptor and this is a glucose channel which is closed. Now, as soon as this insulin binds to the insulin receptor, this glucose channel opens and now glucose from the blood is transported inside the cell. So, insulin is essential for the uptake of glucose by the cells. As glucose goes inside the cell, level of glucose in the blood reduces. So, the most important function of insulin is to lower level of glucose in the blood. Now, as we all know, carbohydrates in a meal, carbohydrates in food are converted to glucose and the glucose is absorbed in the blood. So, after a meal, blood glucose rises and this is called as postprandial rise in blood glucose, that is rise in level of glucose in the blood after the meals. So, here insulin increases uptake of glucose by the cells, thereby reducing levels of glucose in the blood, and this is the most important function of insulin. And this glucose is utilized by the cell to produce energy. Now, excess glucose is stored as glycogen in liver and muscles and is also stored as fat in the adipose tissue. So, without insulin, most of the body cells do not get glucose. Glucose is not stored as glycogen, while the fats are broken down to produce ketoacids. And this can cause diabetic ketoacidosis, which can be fatal. Now, insulin in small amounts is constantly produced by the pancreas and this insulin is called as basal insulin. Now, larger quantities of insulin released from the pancreas after consumption of food is termed as prandial insulin. Now, these insulin preparations, they are used primarily in the management of type 1 diabetes mellitus. Now, type 1 diabetes mellitus is an autoimmune disease where beta cells are destroyed and therefore insulin is not produced and therefore these patients depend on external source of insulin. Another use of these insulin preparations is in the management of advanced type 2 diabetes mellitus. So, this is in general about the functions, structure and uses of insulin preparations. Now let's talk about sources of insulin preparations. Insulin can be obtained either from animals or from a human source. Now insulin from animal source is highly purified pork or beef insulin. Now human insulin is made up of 51 amino acids Beef insulin differs from human insulin by 3 amino acids, while pork insulin differ by 1 amino acid. Now, from human source, two types of insulin are synthesized. One is recombinant human insulin and others are insulin analogs. Now, with the availability of these human insulin, use of animal insulin has declined dramatically. Now, let's talk about the synthesis of recombinant human insulin and try to understand what are insulin analogs. Now, insulin from human source is developed by recombinant DNA technology. For synthesis of human insulin, human proinsulin gene is inserted into either Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that is baker's yeast, which is utilized for making bread, or in non-pathogenic E. coli. These organisms produce human insulin. So, the synthesized human insulin by these organisms is then isolated and purified. Now, insulin analogs are also developed by recombinant DNA technology. Now, here molecular structure of insulin is slightly modified to produce insulin analogs. Now, modification in the structure mainly causes changes in the absorption of insulin when administered by the subcutaneous route. Absorption can be rapid or it can be slow. Now, rapid acting insulin analogs like insulin aspart, insulin lispro, insulin glulicine, these are absorbed very fast. These are absorbed rapidly. They produce quick action and their onset of action is only about 15 minutes. Whereas insulin glargine, then insulin detamir, insulin digludac, these are absorbed slowly and these are long acting insulin. These insulin preparations produce their effect for 24 hours or even more than that. So, that is the advantage of insulin analogs. Now, let's understand the general pharmacokinetics of insulin preparations. Now, subcutaneous route is the most widely and commonly used route of administration of these insulin preparations. Now, insulin preparations are commonly self-administered by the subcutaneous route by syringes, pens and pumps. Now, intravenous route is also used. It is used for some insulin preparations only during emergency, and that also in the hospitals under the supervision of a clinician or a healthcare provider. And these insulin preparations and their therapeutic effect are monitored continuously. Now, insulin is eliminated by kidneys and liver, and thus renal dysfunction reduces clearance of insulin preparations and increase the risk of hypoglycemia. Now, let's classify the insulin preparations. Now, commercially available insulin preparations are categorized as rapid acting insulin preparations. These preparations produce their effect very quickly in around 15 minutes. Then short acting insulin preparations, they have a short duration of action of 6 to 8 hours. Then intermediate acting insulin preparations producing their effect for 20 to 24 hours depending upon the dose. Then long acting insulin preparations, these are effective for 24 hours or they produce their effect even more than that. All these insulin preparations primarily reduce the levels of glucose in the blood. Now, these insulin preparations vary from each other in terms of onset, peak and duration of action. Now, onset refers to the time required by the insulin preparation to begin its action. So, onset determines how quickly insulin preparation acts. Then, peak refers to the time when the insulin levels are found to be highest in the blood. So, a peak determines how long it takes the insulin preparation to reach maximum blood levels. Then duration is the length of time insulin preparation is effective. That means how long the effect of preparation lasts, or how long the effect of preparation continues to reduce the levels of glucose in the blood. So now let's talk about these insulin preparations in some details. Before going into the details of insulin preparations, look at this chart. Now this chart depicts variation in terms of onset, peak, duration of action between different categories of insulin preparations. Now this is a blue color graph. This graph is for rapid acting insulin preparations, namely insulin Lispro, insulin Aspart. Now as shown in the figure, onset of action is very rapid, it's very fast, around 15 minutes. So these preparations act quickly after subcutaneous administration. Now maximum level, maximum level of insulin in the blood, that is the peak, reaches within 1 to 1.5 hours after the administration, and the duration of action is 3 to 5 hours, and thus these are usually administered 3 times daily, immediately before or after breakfast, lunch and dinner. Now these rapid acting insulin preparations control postprandial, that is after meals, increased level of glucose in the blood. This red color graph is for short acting regular insulin. Now the onset of action is between 30 to 60 minutes. Highest level of insulin in the blood is obtained within 2 to 3 hours, and these are termed as short acting as their duration of action is between 6 to 8 hours, and these are usually administered 3 times daily, usually 30 minutes before the breakfast, lunch and dinner, to control postprandial after meals blood glucose levels. This green color graph is for intermediate acting insulin, that is the NPH insulin. Now NPH insulin is termed as intermediate acting since its duration of action is 20 to 24 hours, neither short nor long. Now this preparation is absorbed slowly, and therefore the onset or effect is seen within 1 to 2 hours of subcutaneous administration, and the peak levels are achieved 8 to 10 hours after the administration. And NPH insulin is usually administered twice daily, and it controls blood glucose during fasting. That is, it controls blood glucose when we are not eating between the meals and overnight. These are two graphs for long acting insulin preparations. Now this graph in solid black line is for insulin glargine. Now onset is slow, and it produces its effect in 2 to 4 hours, while the duration is long, 24 hours. Now this dotted graph represents insulin detemir. Now the onset is 1 to 4 hours, while duration of action is 20 to 24 hours. Now as their duration of action is 24 hours, they are termed as long acting insulin preparations, and these are usually administered once daily. Now look at this graph. These long acting insulin preparations show consistent release of insulin, and insulin is released, same amount of insulin is released for all the 24 hours, and thus the peak is found to be absent, and therefore since they are long lasting, they are administered once daily, and these long acting insulin preparations control blood glucose during fasting, that is between the meals and overnight. Now let's study each category of these insulin preparations in some details. Let's first talk about rapid acting insulin preparations. Most common commercially available rapid acting insulin preparations are insulin Lispro and insulin Aspart. These are insulin analogs. Now, insulin Lispro is available by the brand name Humalog, manufactured by Lilly, which is a pharmaceutical company. Then insulin Aspart is available commercially as by the brand name Novolog, manufactured by the pharmaceutical company Novo Nordisk. Now, as already discussed, these are termed as rapid acting as their absorption is very rapid and they produce very quick action. Action is produced within 15 minutes after their subcutaneous administration. Now, these insulin preparations are used to control post-meal rise in the blood glucose level. So, these preparations achieve postprandial glycemic control. Now, since their onset is very rapid, they produce their effect within 15 minutes. These are administered either immediately before or after the meals. And these preparations are used along with the intermediate and long acting insulin preparations. Now, as already discussed, these intermediate and long acting insulin preparations, they provide glycemic control between the meals and overnight. So, very important, these rapid acting insulin preparations control post meal rise in the blood glucose levels. And as already seen while discussing the graph, the peak levels of these preparations is achieved in 1 to 1.5 hours after the subcutaneous administration, and the duration of effect is 3 to 5 hours, and therefore these are administered 3 times daily. Second category of insulin preparations is short acting regular insulin. It is commercially available by the name of Humulin R, manufactured by Lilly, and Novolin R, manufactured by Novo Nordisk. Now, here capital letter R stands for the regular insulin. Now, as already discussed, onset of these preparations is between 30 to 60 minutes. Peak levels of insulin are achieved within 2 to 3 hours after subcutaneous administration. And as duration of action is short, that is 6 to 8 hours, this type of insulin preparation is called as short acting insulin preparation. Now, this category of insulin is similar to rapid acting insulin analogs. Now, since onset is between 30 to 60 minutes, these are usually administered approximately 30 minutes before the meals. Now, adherence to this schedule is mostly inconvenient and difficult for the patient. So, rapid acting insulin preparations are preferred over short acting regular insulin. Now, similar to rapid acting, this insulin preparation is also used to control postprandial, that is after meal rise in the blood glucose levels, and this is also administered thrice daily, that is 30 minutes before the breakfast, lunch and the dinner. And this preparation is often used along with the long acting insulin preparation, because the long acting insulin preparation provide basal insulin coverage and control blood glucose when we are fasting, and that means when we are not eating during the between the meals and overnight. Next is intermediate acting insulin, that is NPH insulin, where NPH stands for neutral protamine hagidon insulin. Now, protamine is added to the to complex insulin molecules so that the complex dissociates slowly and remain effective for long time. Now, this NPH insulin is available commercially by the brand names Humulin N manufactured by Lilly and Novolin N manufactured by Novo Nordisk, where N stands for NPH insulin. Now, as already discussed, onset takes around 1 to 2 hours and peak insulin levels are obtained in 8 to 10 hours after administration, and the duration of action is between 20 to 24 hours. Now, this insulin preparation is usually used to provide the basal insulin coverage and to control the levels of glucose in blood when we are not eating, that is between the meals and overnight. And it is most commonly used along with the regular insulin, because regular insulin controls postprandial, that is after meals, rise in the blood glucose levels, and uh, this insulin provides the basal insulin coverage. So, the combination of intermediate acting insulin and regular insulin control the blood glucose levels after meal as well as between the meals and also overnight. Now let's talk about the long-acting insulin preparations. Now, insulin detemir is available commercially by the brand name Levemir, manufactured by Novo Nordisk, whereas insulin glargine is available as Lantus, manufactured by Sanofi Aventis. Now, these are termed as long-acting as the duration of action is for 24 hours. Now, both these preparations are insulin analogs, and as discussed while discussing the chart, the peak is absent, and they provide basal insulin coverage. That means they control the glucose levels during fasting, that is between the meals and overnight. And these are often used along with rapid and short acting insulin preparations which control postprandial rise in the blood glucose level. So, these are the 4 categories of insulin preparations. Now, rapid acting and short acting regular insulin control postprandial, that is after meal, rise in the blood glucose levels, while intermediate acting and the long acting insulin preparations control the glucose levels during fasting, that means between the meals and overnight. And therefore, insulin preparations are often used in combination of preparations that control postprandial blood glucose plus a preparation that is long acting and provides the basal insulin coverage. Now, adverse effects of insulin preparations. Hypoglycemia is the most frequent and serious adverse effect. It usually occurs following high doses of insulin or missing a meal after the injection of insulin. Then local reaction like lipodystrophy of subcutaneous fat around the injection. This can occur. Now, this can be avoided by instructing the patient to rotate the site of insulin injection, that is not to inject on the same site every day. Then another adverse effect is the weight gain. It is also a common side effect of insulin therapy. So, this is in brief on different categories of insulin preparations. Please note, information provided in this video is only for academic informative purpose. This information has been collected from the book Essentials of Medical Pharmacology by K.D. Tripathi. For use of insulin preparations or for the treatment of diabetes mellitus, consult your physician. Do not self-medicate yourself. And if you find the video useful, kindly like, subscribe and share this video. Thanks for watching this video.